Okay, welcome back everyone. I'm going to continue on sharing some teachings with you guys on this next topic of the 5 Precepts, a householder's guide to daily practice. This is where you're going to learn about the 5 impactful decisions that you could make, either wisely or unwisely, that's going to lead to either wholesome results or wholesome Kamma, or unwholesome results, which will be all unwholesome Kamma. These 5 precepts, they're not rules, they're not commandments. It's not the Buddha telling you what you should or shouldn't be doing in your life. He's just helping you to be able to see this natural law of Kamma, of cause and effect, that when you make decisions wisely, you will experience wholesome results. But when you make decisions unwisely, you're going to experience unwholesome results or unwholesome Kamma. And when you lack wisdom of the natural law, you're going to tend to make unwholesome decisions or unwise decisions that are going to lead to unwholesome results. So it's through cultivation of wisdom around these natural laws that you'll then be able to awaken to this wisdom to be able to make wiser and wiser decisions, experiencing more and more wholesome results in your life. So I'm going to walk you guys through these 5 precepts, helping you understand based on the original words of the Buddha, but then I'm going to show you how to relate it to day-to-day activities and certain decisions that you make in your day-to-day life. So this natural law of Kamma is cause and effect, or action and result. It's the results of your decisions. It's your life, your decisions, and your results. It's nothing mystical or magical. It's not about punishments and rewards. It's none of that kind of stuff. It's just like a sequence of events. So these 5 precepts are going to help you to see wise decision making around 5 impactful decisions that you could make. Okay, so this is the first one. These are the words of the Buddha on the first precept. He says, abandoning the taking of life, refraining from taking life, without stick or sword, diligent, compassionate, trembling for the welfare of all living beings. So with the teachings of the Buddha, as you guys heard me share, you don't believe any of his teachings. Don't believe it, right? The Buddha never taught you to believe him. He taught you to investigate, examine his teachings. So when you see a teaching like this, you should start examining it and start investigating it. Obviously, he's talking about compassion towards all living beings, because whenever you cause harm to a living being, that harm is going to come back to you. So the first thing you need to do is understand what is a living being. Don't assume that you know what a living being is. You need to be able to investigate it, to be able to see very clearly what is a living being. So the Buddha taught something called the 5 aggregates, or the 5 criteria that make a living being a living being. He talks about form, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, and consciousness. These are the 5 things that a living being is going to have. They're going to have physical form, right? You can reflect on this to verify what I'm sharing with you. A living being is going to have physical form. Because you know you're a living being, you have physical form. A living being is going to have feelings, right? They're going to have certain feelings, painful feelings, pleasant feelings, neither painful nor pleasant. This is what a living being is going to experience, is feelings. Then they're going to have certain perceptions. Perceptions are like your views and opinions about the world. Then there's volitional formations, which are choices and decisions. A living being is going to have free will. They're going to be able to make choices and decisions about what they experience on a day-to-day basis. Then there's a consciousness, or a mind. These are the 5 things that a living being is going to have: form, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, which are choices and decisions, and then a consciousness, or a mind. So you know that you meet all 5 of those criteria: a squirrel, a rabbit, a whale, a fish, a bird, an ant, a bee, a butterfly. They're all living beings because they meet all 5 of these criteria, or these aggregates. They have all 5 aggregates. So you can independently verify that this is true. This definition is held up for 2,500 years. But then, because you're interested in really diving into this and not just believing anything, you can take something that you know is not a living being, and you can reflect on these 5 aggregates to see if it's true or false. So for example, this chair that I'm sitting in, does it have physical form? Yes, yeah, it does, right? It has physical form. Does it have feelings? No, it doesn't have feelings. Does it have perceptions? Does it have views and opinions about the world? No, it doesn't have those. Can it make choices and decisions? Does it have volitional formations? Can it choose to pick itself up, walk down the street, and set itself back down? Can't do that, right? Does it have a mind or a consciousness? No, it doesn't, right? So we know that this is not a living being. right? So what the Buddha is talking about here is living compassionately, which compassion is the concern for the misfortune of others for all living beings. And when you go out into the world and you're actively killing living beings, you're causing harm to them. And now that harm is going to come back to you. You can be killed yourself. You can get beat up and murdered. You can have all kinds of things. You can get arrested for these kinds of things. Well, I have this up here to just kind of be like a shorthand way to help you until you penetrate into the five aggregates a bit more, is that a living being is typically going to come from an egg, a sperm, and it's going to have a consciousness. This isn't true in all situations. There's some living beings that don't come from an egg and a sperm. They all have a consciousness, but they don't all come from an egg and a sperm. But this will help you in a large majority of the situations, probably 99.9% of the situations. But ultimately, you need to be able to understand the five aggregates. But what you can understand through the five aggregates, and even through this definition, is that things like bacteria or a plant or a virus, it's not a living being. One of the challenges that happen in the unenlightened state is with the lack of wisdom, the mind will speak in ways that is not true. We might say, I'm going to take this antibiotic and I'm going to kill this bacteria in my body. You're not killing the bacteria because the bacteria is not a living being. It doesn't have all five aggregates. It has physical form, but it doesn't have feelings. It doesn't have perceptions. It doesn't have volitional formations. It doesn't make choices and decisions, and it doesn't have a consciousness. So you're not actually killing that bacteria or that virus. Same thing with a plant. We might say, don't kill that plant. Don't kill that tree, right? Or I'm going to kill this tree. You're not killing that tree. You're not killing that weed because it's not a living being. You're harvesting that tree or you're harvesting that plant. That's what's really truly going on. You're harvesting it for a resource. So when we pick broccoli or we're picking an apple or an orange, we're not actually killing anything. We're just harvesting this, right? But our mind in the unenlightened state, with our lack of wisdom, we will tend to speak in ways that isn't actually true. So it's important to understand what a living being is and what a living being is not. Because if you're out there killing a living being, then that's causing harm, and harm is going to come to you. So this is what the Buddha is teaching you, is to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. Notice he's not saying preserve all life at all cost. That's not what he's saying. Sometimes that's what people do, is they read teachings like this and they interpret it in their own mind within their own way. But it's important that you don't do that, that you see what the Buddha is actually teaching you. He's not teaching you black and white. He's teaching you to move to a higher consciousness and to make wise decisions about what it is that you're choosing to do. So now we're going to talk about some different examples to be able to relate this precept, because I can show you in situations where it would be unwise to kill, but I can also show you in situations where it could potentially be very wise to kill in certain situations. Notice he's not saying preserve all life at all costs. He's teaching you to have compassion for all living beings. So let me share this with you. These are all intentional killings. Euthanasia of a human or animal, termination of a pregnancy, suicide, assisted suicide, capital punishment, war, any government-sponsored killings, murders. These are all intentional killings. But whether you choose to do these things or not is going to depend on the situation. It's going to depend on the variables. The Buddha's teachings aren't black and white. He's not saying if this happens, do this. If this happens, do that. Because if that was the case, that would be permanence. That every time this happens, you should always do it this way. That would be permanence. The Buddha is teaching you to move to a higher consciousness, think through the variables that you're experiencing, and decide what will be wise in any given situation. So let's take a few of these, and I'll show you in situations where it could be wise or it could be unwise. So let's take this one of termination of a pregnancy. Now, some people see this as a political discussion, and I don't see it that way. I see it as a human discussion, because we have this medical technology to terminate a pregnancy, and in some situations it could be wise, in other situations it could be unwise. But ultimately, the choice is up to the individual. It's not up to me to tell people what they should or shouldn't be doing with their body. Each individual makes their decision for themselves. In fact, if somebody came to me and asked me, should I terminate my pregnancy or not, I wouldn't answer that as yes or no. I would say, well, if you terminate your pregnancy, this is what you would experience. And if you don't terminate your pregnancy, this is what you'll experience. And then it's up to that person to make their own decisions. So I'll share with you how to apply this and be able to see the natural law of Kamma. But what somebody chooses to do, that's a choice for them to make. It's not up to me to decide for someone else what they should or shouldn't be doing with their body. So let's just say I was a female, and obviously I'm not, but let's just say I was, and I had a womb in my body, and there was a fetus growing in the womb. And let's just say through medical technology, a doctor shares with me that there's no way that this fetus is ever going to live a viable life outside the womb. And as long as you leave it inside your womb, you're threatening your own life and you could die at any time, right? Well, to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, the first being you need to have compassion for is this being who you are. If you don't have compassion for this being, you're not practicing this precept, right? So it wouldn't necessarily be compassionate for the welfare of all living beings if I left this fetus in the womb threatening my own life, because it's never going to live a viable life outside the womb. So in this situation, someone might choose to terminate the pregnancy, and this could be a wise decision, right? And maybe this happens once in a lifetime, maybe twice max, right? These things don't happen very frequently, but it is a potential. But now let's just say another side. Let's just say I was out there having sex with lots and lots of different people. I was regularly getting pregnant, and I was terminating pregnancies as part of birth control. Let's just say 4, 5, 6, 8 different times I've terminated a pregnancy. Well, now in this situation, it's going to cause harm to this body, because I'm now causing harm to these living beings, terminating the pregnancy regularly for birth control, rather than just make different decisions for myself to use birth control or maybe not have as much sex, and instead using birth control. Now, those 5, 8, 10 different times that I'm terminating a pregnancy, each one of those procedures is causing harm to my body. And now my body is going to become less and less healthy as a result of my choice to continue to terminate these pregnancies over and over and over again. So this is where somebody needs to look at their choices and make a choice for themselves. I'm not here to tell you what you should or shouldn't do, but you can see the natural law of Kamma very clearly, that in this once in a lifetime kind of thing, yeah, that someone might choose to do that, and that could be a wise decision to terminate a pregnancy. But if we're doing that regularly, constantly, over and over for birth control, this is where it's going to cause harm to our physical body. And this is the harm that we're incurring as a result of having caused harm. We can look at some of these other ones, like, say, war. Right? This natural law of Kamma is functioning at all times, and it's a much higher law than the human laws. The human laws, a government could say to us, hey, go over there to that country and kill those people. And if you go over there and kill those people, we're not going to arrest you for murder. But if you come over here and you kill our people, we're going to arrest you for murder. This is a human law, and it's imperfect. But you can't escape the natural law of Kamma. If you go off to war and you're killing in war, you're very likely to be killed yourself. You could get injured. You could come back addicted to drugs and alcohol. You can have a hard time reintegrating into society. You can have a hard time finding housing and employment. You can have medical challenges. Oftentimes soldiers that have been in war, they commit suicide. These are all things that are occurring because of my unwise decision to go off to war. These things can happen, right? This is the cause and effect. And whether someone chooses to do that or not, it's up to them. But this is the cause and effect of what's happening. So let me use another example. This is actually a real life example. Let's just say you had termites in your home and they were eating your home, which actually was happening. At one time, our family had termites. They were eating our home. What would you do if you were going to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings? Right? Remember, this doesn't say preserve all life at all cost. So in order to live compassionately, meaning you have concern for the misfortune of others, what we chose to do is look online to see if there was a way to eradicate the termites from our home without killing them. And what we realized is that there was no way to do that. So we needed to end up calling somebody to come and take care of this issue. And they came and they basically killed the termites. They left food that they would eat, and then they would take it back to their nest, and then it ended up eradicating the termites, right? So this is the challenge of being in the animal world, is that if human beings ate wood, we would have enough consciousness to go out into the forest and eat wood that isn't going to cause harm to anybody. But these termites, they didn't have that level of consciousness, so they were eating a house. And this was causing harm to certain people. And now harm came to them because of the harm that they were causing, right? So in certain situations, you might actually be wise to eradicate these termites. But of course, we lived compassionately and we tried to figure out a way to get rid of them without killing them. But if we were to just let these termites eat our home and destroy our home, we wouldn't have a place to live. So now me, my wife, my son, we'd be out of a home. We wouldn't have a shelter to live, right? So we needed to be able to do this. So it's important that you see what the Buddha is teaching you is to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. He's not teaching you to preserve all life at all cost. That's not what the Buddha is teaching you. So you need to move to this higher consciousness and make wise decisions. So some examples that students have asked me over the years is they've asked me about a DNR, or a do not resuscitate order. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. This is something that some countries have, where when you're alive like this, you can sign a legal document that tells your family that if this body dies, don't use medical technology to bring me back to life. And sometimes students say, hey, I have this, I've signed this, am I practicing this precept? And the answer is yes, you are. Because you haven't killed anybody. There's been no intentional killing. What you're telling your family by signing that document is that you're completely comfortable with death and don't bring me back to life. So you're still practicing this precept. And then sometimes people ask me about defense and protection. Like say somebody was breaking into your house at 3 a.m. in the morning. They were breaking through the window and you get woken up in the middle of the night when you're sleeping. They say, what should I do? Well, remember, the teachings of the Buddha aren't about plug and play. It's not about always do it one particular way. But in that situation, the advice that I would give somebody is if you can, get out of the house, right? Because if they want to steal something, if they want to break something, if they want to do something, let them do it. Go out of the house, go get safe, call the police. Let the police come and deal with it. They have the equipment and the training of how to deal with that person, because they're not there to bring you chocolate and flowers. They're there to do harm, right? They're breaking into your house at 3 a.m. in the morning. So if you can, get out. But that's not always going to be the case. Because of impermanence, maybe you look outside and there's a fire and everything's on fire and you can't get out of the house. Or maybe there's a gang of 20 people outside your house waiting for you. It wouldn't necessarily be wise to go outside. So if these people have you backed up into the corner and they're there to cause harm to you, and you need to cause harm to them in order to stop this harm, you're still living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, because the first being you need to have compassion for is this being. It wouldn't be living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings if you just stood there and let them stab you with a knife or hit you on the head with a piece of wood or to otherwise cause harm to this being. So if you need to inflict harm to stop this harm coming to you, you can do that, and you can know that you're practicing this precept. What I would suggest you do is you cause the least amount of harm as possible. So if they have a stick, get a bigger stick. Right? Cause the least amount of harm. And once the harm is stopped, then you stop, right? Don't just sit there and just continuing to cause them harm because you're angry or frustrated. As soon as the harm's done, stop causing harm. Just apply enough harm that it stops the harm coming to you, right? Sometimes people ask me about eating plant-based food. They ask, would this be living this precept? And the answer is yes. That's how oftentimes people, when they're practicing this precept very closely, they choose to switch to a plant-based food supply. Whether you do this or when you do it or if you do it, it's a choice for you to make. But there is a natural law of Kamma here that is affecting us, right? If we continue to kill animals the way that we are, it's drastically impacting the health of our body and our environment as well. That when you eat meat, it's causing sickness to your physical body. And not only that, but you're eating drugs and hormones and toxins that are inside the meat, and it's affecting the condition of your mind as well. They've done research where they've taken wild salmon out of very clean streams, like in the USA, and they've tested the flesh of the animal. And they found over 80 or 90 different substances that weren't supposed to be in there. things like cocaine and antidepressants and things like this, because we've been flushing all that stuff down into the toilet, and now it's polluted the water table. And now these wild fish have these substances. And even farmed animals, they're putting all kinds of hormones and antibiotics and things like this into the meat. So you're actually ingesting that when you're eating that. And that's why it's causing harm to the body and to the mind. So you can't avoid that harm if you're continuing to eat meat. So you might decide to move to a plant-based food supply. Whether you choose to do that or not, it's a choice for you to make. But there is a certain cause and effect here that it's causing harm to the physical body. At one time, human beings were plant-based eaters. We only switched to meat out of necessity. You can see this through our teeth. Researchers and scientists tell us that we used to be plant-based eaters when we first came onto this planet. But you don't have to believe them. You can see the truth for yourself through your teeth. That our teeth are very similar to a cow's teeth or a horse's teeth because they eat grass and they eat grain. And that's the way our teeth are constructed as well. We only started eating meat out of necessity because we ran out of plants in the forest because our population became too much. So we started taking over the hunt of wild animals. So when a wild animal would kill, we would essentially be scavengers, and we would run away animals, and we would take over the kill, and we would start eating the meat. Well, that wasn't enough meat for us because we grew more and more populous. So we started learning how to do organized hunting ourselves. And then we started organizing as human beings, and we started organizing and hunting and killing animals. That wasn't enough for us. So then we switched to manufactured farming. And nowadays we manufacture animals, and they're actually killed massive amounts of animals every day in order to feed the human population. And this is causing harm to our environment. It's causing harm to the physical body. And now with all those drugs and hormones and toxins that the farmers are putting into the animal because they're trying to hurry up and grow the animal so they can make more profit, you're actually ingesting that. So this is something you can look at and decide for yourself if this is something you'd like to continue to do. If you decide to move to a plant-based food supply, I'd suggest you do it gradually. Whereas if you try to snap your fingers and instantly do it, it's too much for the body and the mind. It kind of is too jarring for the mind and the body. Whereas if you do it more gradually, your mind will have a better ability to maintain its peacefulness and its joy, and it'll adapt and adjust more readily rather than an abrupt change. So do you guys have any questions on this first precept? Remember, if you guys could use the mics here, and then for online, you guys can put those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom in the comment section, or in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand, unmute your microphone, and then ask any and all questions that you like that way. So any questions? In here? Okay, let me see if we have anything online here. Okay, I don't see any questions online. Okay, so now we'll go to the second precept. This one is the words of the Buddha. He says, abandoning the taking of what is not given, living purely, accepting what is given, awaiting what is given, without stealing. So here, the Buddha is obviously teaching not to steal, right? Because when we steal things from people, this is coming from our craving, our anger, and our ignorance. Just like the first one, there's a certain craving to kill. There's certain anger and ill will, and it's coming from the ignorance, and that's why it produces unwholesome results for you. Same thing here is if we steal, there's a certain craving that the mind has. It's like, I want that thing. I don't want to work for it. I don't want to earn it myself. I want to steal it, right? This is coming from the mind's craving. And then there's ill will towards this other person because that other person earned that thing and they bought that thing. And now when we take it from them, it's going to cause harm to them. So there's a certain amount of ill will towards that person. And then it's coming from our ignorance or our unknowing of true reality. And that's why it produces unwholesome results for us when we make decisions to steal. So the Buddha is teaching you that it's unwise to steal, right? It's also important to understand that we shouldn't assume that something should be taken or could be taken and used. So let's say I was a college student and I was turning in a paper to my professor. And let's just say on their desk, they have a stapler and they're outside the room. And now when I come into class, I would like to turn in my paper, but it's not stapled. And maybe I just pick up the stapler off the desk and I start stapling my paper. Well, if the professor walks in and sees that, it's like, hey, what are you doing? That's my stapler. Maybe they're attached to their stapler, right? And now they start getting angry and frustrated. And they don't realize that they're causing their own anger. They're causing their own frustration. They think it's me that's causing that. And now they become bitter and harsh and hostile with me. And now maybe they fail me on that paper. Or maybe they fail me in the entire class just because of my unwise decision to use this stapler. Right? Where what would be wise is to not assume that it can be used and say, hey, professor, can I use your stapler? And they're either going to say yes or no. And if they say yes, great, I staple my paper. If they say no, you can't use it. Okay, now I'll just go find one somewhere else. Maybe I'll go buy one, right? But when you assume that something can be used and you just take it, now you're putting yourself in a compromised situation. So what the Buddha is teaching you how to do is not only to get to peace and joy within your own mind, but to navigate the world full of unenlightened beings, because there's going to be people that are holding on to their material possessions and they're going to be unwilling to share it with you. So he's teaching you how to navigate this world of unenlightened beings so that you don't find yourself in situations where people are getting angry and bitter and hostile and harsh with you, when in fact it's their own mind that's doing that. So you can't cause somebody else to be discontent, but you can cause them harm. Causing someone harm would be causing harm to their material possessions, to their physical body, or to their reputation. If you cause harm to someone's physical body, their material possessions, or their reputation, they're going to perceive that harm and they're going to want to harm you back. Right? So anytime you cause harm, they're going to want to cause harm back to you. That's the way the unenlightened mind works. So you would like to navigate the world where you're not causing harm to other beings. So while the Buddha teaches you here to not steal and not assume that something can be used or taken, remember, it's not black and white, right? You need to move to a higher consciousness and be able to make wise decisions. If I was out in my village and there was a person in the village that had cut their arm and they were bleeding profusely from their arm and they're going to die because they're bleeding so much, but my neighbor has a fabric on their front porch that I could grab that fabric and put a tourniquet on their arm, I'm just going to grab the tourniquet and put it on their arm. I'm not going to knock on the door, wait for them to come downstairs. Excuse me, neighbor, how are you? Do you mind if I borrow this fabric? No, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to grab the fabric. I'm going to wrap up their arm in a tourniquet, save that person's life, send them to the hospital in an ambulance, and then I'm going to go back to the neighbor. Ding dong. Hello, neighbor. How are you? I'm so sorry. I apologize. There was a piece of fabric on your patio that I just took, and I really apologize for taking it without your permission. I used it for our neighbor to be able to put on a tourniquet, and they're on their way to the hospital, and it looks like they're not going to die. And I really appreciate that you had this fabric on your porch, but I would like to reimburse you for it. Is there a way that you can tell me where you got it from so I can go get one for you? Or can I give you some money for this? Right? And probably what they're going to say is, don't worry about it. You're just fine, right? Or they might say, oh, it's over here, it's over there. Or, oh, that fabric was $50. Here you go, right? That's my generosity that I'm willing to do that. But if you didn't understand this wisdom, you might not do that, right? So what the Buddha is teaching you here is not black and white. You need to be able to move to this higher consciousness and make decisions in a certain way. And if you understand that it's unwise to just take something, well, in that situation, you would know to go back and apologize and make amends to this person. Same thing like this next one. Accepting what is given. That's what he says up here. Accept what is given. What he's saying here is that when someone's practicing generosity with you, that it's wise to accept it. The reason why is because that person who's practicing generosity, it's enhancing the quality of their mind. If you shut that down where you're like, no, I don't want that, now they don't get a chance to practice generosity and they're not enhancing the quality of their mind. And if you shut people down enough, eventually they're going to stop practicing generosity with you. So if your grandmother is giving you a sweater at some holiday and you look at this sweater and you're like, I'll never wear that sweater, right? It's best to just accept it. Just accept it, because that's helping grandma's mind to practice generosity and train her mind to let go. But now what you do is you practice generosity. You give it to somebody else. And now maybe 6, 8, 10 hands later, somebody finds a sweater and they're like, that's the most beautiful sweater I've ever seen. I'm going to wear that every single day. Right? And now all these people got to practice generosity, 6, 8, 10 people. If grandma gets angry that you gave away the sweater, that's because grandma wasn't practicing pure generosity. She had an expectation that you were going to wear her sweater. She's causing her own anger. You didn't cause that, right? So you can hand this off to somebody else, right? So the Buddha teaches you to accept what is given. But remember, it's not black and white. If somebody offers you crystal methamphetamine or heroin or cocaine, are you going to accept what is given? No, right? That would be unwise to accept that. So the Buddha's not teaching you black and white. It's not plug and play here. You need to move to a higher consciousness and make wise decisions, awaiting what is given. Again, here, you need to move to a higher consciousness and understand. What he's teaching you is to not put your expectations on people and try to force people to get you something. So let's just say you have a life partner who's going on a business trip. It would be unwise to say, honey, get me this and get me that and get me this and get me that, right? Because now you're loading them up with a bunch of expectations. Now they're on their business trip trying to find all these things for you. And if they come back and they have these things, you're happy. And if they don't have them, you're angry or frustrated. So the Buddha is teaching you how to protect your mind and protect the relationship so that you don't load this person up with a bunch of expectations. But let's just say somebody comes to you. This has happened to me, where a student came here one time and they said, hey, David, I'm going back to the USA for 6 weeks. Can I bring you something? Is there something from the USA that you need that I could bring you? In this situation, they're practicing generosity. And now they're offering to bring me something, right? So in this situation, you might say, sure, I would like to have this, right? Could you bring me this, right? So you need to be able to see the teachings. It's not plug and play. It's not black and white. You need to be able to understand the wisdom behind it. So do you guys have any questions on this one? No questions here? Okay. Looks like we have something online here. 1 second. Looks like Amit is asking, in the Pali Canon, Buddha mentioned the threefold purity that is acceptable for monks to eat meat if they have not seen, heard, suspected that animal was killed specifically for them. In the context of your teaching about plant-based meat as a better way of being, how would you see this principle applying today? Would choosing plant-based options align more closely with the Buddha's broader intention behind compassion and non-harming? So what we have in the Pali Canon is not 100% of what the Buddha taught. There's certain things that he taught that are not in the Pali Canon. And there's certain things in the Pali Canon that aren't what the Buddha actually taught. So yes, what you're seeing in the Pali Canon, that is what's there. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what the Buddha taught, because that's in direct conflict with so many other teachings of the Buddha. If you look at the first precept, you can see that it's in conflict with that, eating meat. You can see in the second precept, it's in conflict with that if you're stealing this meat, that animal didn't willingly give you this meat, that's something that we would be stealing. If you look at the teachings of the Buddha on right livelihood, he teaches to not have business in weapons, living beings, meat, substances that cause heedlessness, and poisons, right? So if everybody practiced his teachings, there wouldn't be any meat available to us. And there's actually teachings from the Chinese canon. If you look at the Chinese canon, because everything that the Buddha taught isn't in the Pali Canon, there's a discourse in the Chinese canon that's worded exactly the same way as the Pali Canon that shows the Buddha having taught that it would be wise to not eat animals. And he talks in that same discourse about how people would gossip and slander him and say that he did teach to eat meat when in reality he didn't. So the way that you can look at the teachings of the Buddha, that he teaches very clearly to live with loving kindness and compassion for all beings. But how could you have loving kindness and compassion for all beings if you're choosing to eat an animal? You're not having loving kindness and compassion there necessarily. But there's going to be some rare situations nowadays that we're starting to switch over to plant-based food that some people aren't going to be able to switch. There's going to be some people that maybe 5 or 10% of their food intake is going to need to be animal products because of the way that our bodies haven't adapted back to being plant-based eaters. So in this situation, someone might choose to still eat a little bit of animal products, and that's still living compassionately for this living being. Because if we weren't to eat that, this being would die, right? So I went to vegan for like 5 or 6 years. My B12 dropped significantly, and I was trying with all the supplements to get the B12 up, but it just wouldn't come up. So I needed to move back into a little bit of eggs and some cheese, and I started eating some ice cream in order to be able to get the B12 back up. But now I'm working towards moving away from those animal products again because my B12 has been brought back up. So this is what it means to live compassionately with loving kindness, is that you look at how your decisions are impacting others and how causing harm is just going to cause harm back to you. So while you see that particular teaching in the Pali Canon, there is no meat in the world that hasn't been specifically killed for you, right? When you go to the grocery store and that meat is all packaged, it's been specifically killed for you. So it would be wise to move to a plant-based food supply, but whether somebody does that or if they choose to do that or when they choose to do that, it's a choice for each person to make. But you can see the cause and effect yourself. Because remember, the teachings of the Buddha, it's not a rule, it's not a commandment. It's being able to see with wisdom the cause and effect yourself. The decision to kill animals and then eat them is causing harm to the environment, and it's causing harm to your physical body. You can see this cause and effect, but you have to be able to see this for yourself and not practice it as a rule or as a commandment. Okay, let me see if we have any other questions here. I don't see any other questions. Okay, so now we'll move into the third precept. This one here, the words of the Buddha are abandoning unchastity, abandoning sexual relations with women, men who are protected by their mother, mother and father, brother, sister, or relatives, who are protected by teachings, who have a husband, wife, or partner, whose violation entails a penalty, or even with one who has been garlanded by a man, woman, or partner as a sign of engagement. So here, this one is usually translated as no sexual misconduct, but you can see the teachings of the Buddha are much deeper than that. He's not teaching this black and white. He's helping you to be able to see this natural law more clearly. So here, where he's talking about abandoning sexual relations with people who are protected by their family, he's talking about having sex with minors, that this would be unwise, that if we were to have sex with an 8-year-old or 12-year-old, this person is getting guidance from their family, and this is going to be very impactful to that person's mind. If you've had sex and you know how impactful that was the first time you had sex, if we were to do that with a little child, it would really affect their ability to grow and develop into a better and better human being. So the Buddha teaches us that it would be unwise to do that. Most places of the world, the human laws are the same as what the Buddha is teaching as the natural law. But there's some places in the world where it's not illegal to have sex with an 8-year-old child or a 12-year-old child. If you look at those places, they're really struggling in terms of their political system, their economy, the educational system of their population of people. They're really struggling because of that. So that's the natural law, that if you regularly have sex with people who are 8, 10, 12 years old, and there's populations that are doing that pretty pervasively, you can see that individuals are not able to be growing and developing and evolving as individuals, and it's affecting the wider society. This is the cause and effect of the natural law of Kamma. Here, where the Buddha talks about whose violation entails a penalty, he's talking about sex without consent. If we were to force someone to have sex, like raping them, this would cause harm to that person, and now harm is going to come to us. This is where you can get beat up, you can get murdered, you can get sexually transmitted diseases, all these kind of things. You can get arrested for these kinds of things because you're causing harm by having sex without consent. Up here, where the Buddha talks about abandoning unchastity, this is having sex with multiple partners. Are you guys familiar with what chastity is? Have you ever heard of this word? No? So what chastity is in ancient times, fathers used to put metal underwear on their daughters. And then the father was the only one that had the lock-in key. And it was only the father that could unlock their underwear. I can't imagine walking around with metal underwear, but there were people who did that in ancient times. So that would be chastity. That would be having sex with nobody whatsoever, right? Because now you have this chastity belt on. Well, unchastity would be just the opposite, where you're having sex with anybody and everybody, right? Maybe you're having multiple partners in 1 week or 1 month. If someone was to have sex and practicing unchastity, this is where you can get sexually transmitted diseases, you can get beat up, and you can get murdered because people get jealous and they know that you have another partner and they pull you back and forth. You can lose your reputation in the community. This is the cause and effect of choosing to have unchastity. So you can see that very clearly. Some cultures, they meet a partner, they live together with their partner at home with their parents, and their parents have accepted their relationship. And in this case, this is normal. This is what some cultures do because you're building up money in order to be able to go buy a house, and your parents have accepted the relationship. So in this situation, you're still practicing this. This isn't someone who's protected by their mother, father, brother, sister, or some other relative. It is somebody who has asked their parents' permission. Can we live with you? And their parents have said yes, and they've accepted the relationship. So those kinds of things are part of what the Buddha is teaching. So sex with someone who has previously decided to remain celibate, this is where the Buddha is talking about who are protected by teachings. Someone who's protected by teachings, this is someone who's decided to no longer have sex. That's part of what some people do as they're journeying to enlightenment. They choose to no longer have sex because as long as you have sensual desire where you're longing, yearning to have sex, in some cases you'll have sex and you'll feel happy, you'll get pleasant feelings. In other situations you can't have sex and you'll be frustrated and agitated or annoyed. So in order to get to permanent peace and permanent joy, the mind has to eliminate its desire for sexual contact. Whether you choose to do this or not, again, it's your choice. You can actually get to the second stage of enlightenment and still have sex. So what some people do when they're quite young is they will work their way up to the second stage of enlightenment, and they'll kind of hang out there. And your life will be quite peaceful in that second stage of enlightenment. And then at some point as you age, if you're interested in no longer having sex, you can move beyond that second stage of enlightenment and get to the third and the fourth stage, where in the fourth stage of enlightenment is where the mind is going to be enlightened. But as long as there's a craving for sex, you're not going to be able to be permanently peaceful and permanently joyful because you can't always get sex. So at a young age, oftentimes people are working towards the second stage of enlightenment, and then they do all the other work on the path, and then at some point they might decide to move beyond that. So if we were to have sex with somebody who had decided to remain celibate, this would be luring that person away from enlightenment. And getting to enlightenment would be the very best thing for anybody. So we would be causing harm to that person. And that person, once they get to enlightenment, they can then share the teachings with other people of how to get to enlightenment. So we're causing harm not only to that person, but the wider community. So that's why the Buddha taught that it would be unwise to have sex with someone who's choosing to be celibate. Here in Thailand, they make this really easy for you because the people who are wearing orange robes and they're shaving their hair, they're celibate, they're not choosing to have sex. So if you were interested to have sex, you would have sex with someone other than that. Here in Thailand, people who wear all white and shave their hair, they're choosing not to have sex any longer. I don't have sex any longer, but that's not why I'm wearing white. That's not why I'm shaving my head. I don't need to advertise to people that I'm not having sex, because the decision to have sex or not is a personal choice for you to make. It's not something you need to advertise to other people. But here in Thailand, they do make it easy that way, that if you see people wearing white every single day, shaving their hair, if you see people wearing orange robes and shaving their hair, you know that they're shouldn't be having sex. In that situation, it would be unwise to have sex. In fact, there's been some people just recently down in Bangkok that were caught having sex with people who were ordained practitioners. And the ordained practitioners, they're having all kinds of issues now. The people who are having sex with them, they're having all kinds of issues. They're being arrested. They're going into court. They're having all kinds of challenges now. And not just the sexual part, but there was money and problems with embezzlement and fraud as well. So you can see these kinds of things where people are experiencing unwholesome results because they don't understand this wisdom and they're not practicing this. Then in terms of sex with people who are already in committed relationships, or if you are in a relationship that's committed, if you were to have sex, this is unchastity. This would be having sex with multiple people. So in this situation, like if someone else had a partner and you were to bring that person out of the relationship to have sex with you, Now you can get beat up, you can get murdered, your material possessions can be destroyed, you can lose your reputation in the community, you can experience sexually transmitted diseases. This is all the unwholesome results of choosing to do those things. So if you're going to have sex, it's best to have just one partner, have a loyal, loving, committed relationship. And if you guys are finished, then just be finished with the relationship and then move on to something else if that's what you're going to do. But if you have multiple relationships, that's where it gets really messy. And then if you were to have sex with someone who's human trafficked, this is someone who's being forced to have sex against their will, and maybe there's payment involved for that. This is unchastity. And if you enter into those environments, you can again get beat up, murdered, you can get robbed, you can get sexually transmitted diseases, you can get arrested. There's all kinds of harmful things that can happen there. Then sometimes people offer paid sexual services, and they're doing it willingly and freely. In this situation, this is unchastity as well, where you're having sex with multiple people and they're having sex with multiple people. And going into that environment, again, you can get beat up, murdered, you can experience sexually transmitted diseases, you can get robbed, and these kinds of things. Notice that the Buddha doesn't talk about same-gender relationships here. He was aware of same-gender relationships because he essentially talks about it in his teachings, because there's never been a time in human history where everybody had sex with the opposite gender. That would be permanence, right? If everybody that was a female had sex with a male and every male had sex with a female, that would be permanence. And we understand the universal truth of impermanence, that things are not permanent. So the Buddha was aware of same-gender relationships, but he doesn't teach it as sexual misconduct because there's no harm involved. If there's two loyal, loving, consenting adults choosing to have sex, if they're male and female, they're not causing harm to anybody. And if they're male and male, they're not causing harm to anybody. If it's female, female, they're not causing harm to anybody. So this is how wise the Buddha was, that he understood 2,500 years ago that individuals choosing to have sex, if they're two loyal, loving, consenting adults, they're not causing harm to anyone. And if you understand the universal truth of impermanence, you understand that same-gender relationships are completely normal. So if you're somebody who has same-gender relationships, there's no harm. You're not causing any harm. But if people have craving in their mind, if they're craving for everybody to have sex with the opposite gender, and they know that you have sex with the same gender, they're going to get angry, but they're causing their own anger. It's not you that's causing that. And where it's coming from is their ignorance, right? So all these precepts are based in the Buddha helping you to be able to see craving, anger, and ignorance. So someone who were to have sex with multiple partners, there's a certain craving there, right? But same-gender relationships, there's no harm there if it's two loyal, loving, consenting adults. We can also understand transgender relationships as well through the teachings of the Buddha, or transgender individuals, right? Transgender individuals, the body is of one gender and the mind is identifying as something different than the body, right? We can understand that if the body is one thing and the mind is something completely different, that it's very possible for the mind to end up in a body that identifies with a different gender. Because if every single mind identified with the gender of the sexual organs, that would be permanence. But we understand the universal truth of impermanence, that not every mind is going to identify with the same gender as the body. And if we understand the cycle of rebirth, that we've all been different animals and different beings at different times, somebody could have been a female, 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 and now that mind could end up in a male human body, and the mind still identifies as a female, still thinks it's a female because of these previous lives. And the same thing can happen where it's male, 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 and now the mind ends up in a male or in a female body, and the mind is identifying as a female, right? So this is completely normal. So if you know someone who's transgender, or if you're transgender, it's completely normal. There's nothing wrong here. But with people's craving and their anger and their ignorance, people get angry at these kinds of things when in reality, it's that person's choice. If they would like to live their life as a male or a female, that's their choice. It's not causing you any harm whatsoever. Sometimes people ask me about masturbation because they've been taught, like, never masturbate, it's all wrong, don't ever do this. Well, there's some situations where masturbation can actually be helpful, but there's situations where it can be harmful as well. So what really determines whether it's helpful or harmful is what direction are you taking your sensual desire. If let's just say somebody's listening to me talk here, and let's just say they have 10 boyfriends or 10 girlfriends, and they're like, wow, the Buddhist teachings are really true. I should just have one. This is really unwise for me to have 10. So you know what? I'm going to bring this down to just one relationship. So now they're used to having sex with 10 people in a week or a month, but now they're going to bring it down to one. And now as they do that, maybe they have this really high sexual craving, and they use a little bit of masturbation to be able to knock that down. This is actually really helpful. Right? Or let's just say somebody was having a craving to go out and rape somebody, but they decide to use some masturbation instead. Hey, that's really helpful, right? It's knocking down the craving, and they're choosing not to go out to rape somebody. This could be really beneficial. But somebody could masturbate so frequently that it increases their sensual desire. Maybe 10, 15, 20 times a day they might be masturbating, and now their sensual desire increases. And in this situation, it will be harmful for their mind. So masturbation can be used to knock down the craving. If you ever learn anything about a dam, what a dam is it's a large multi-million-dollar structure that is designed in order to hold water back, and it protects a certain town or village from all this water flowing. Well, when they build these multi-million-dollar dams, sometimes the water builds up on the dam so high that it puts pressure on the dam. And the way that they protect the dam is they open it up and they let the water out so that it releases the pressure. And then once the pressure goes down, they close the dam again. Right? And this protects the dam from being destroyed, and it protects the town as well. Well, your mind kind of functions this way. If you're reducing your sexual activity, you might notice there's a lot of pressure in your mind. You might go a week or 2 or 3 without having sex, and you feel all this pressure building up in your mind. Well, you could actually use a little bit of masturbation to release that pressure. That's like opening up the dam, right? And then you close the dam again. And now maybe you go 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 2 months, 3 months without any sex. And then maybe you feel the pressure again, and maybe you need to use a little bit of masturbation to release the pressure. But now you close the dam again, and now maybe you go 6 months or a year without having sex. But then maybe you feel a little bit of pressure and you need a little bit of masturbation to knock that down. And eventually you're working to the point where you don't have this longing, yearning, and this craving for sex anymore. You're experiencing more peace and more joy in that situation. So masturbation can actually be used in a beneficial way. It just depends on which direction are you moving your sensual desire. Sex with animals is one of the few things that's very black and white, right? An animal can't give us consent to have sex with it. And I imagine if somebody chose to do that, they could get diseases or illness, they could get injured and things like this. So it would be unwise to have sex with the animal. Sometimes people ask me about pornography. If someone is headed towards pornography, normally they're having a craving for affection, they're having craving for sexual contact, and moving towards pornography is their way of acquiring that. But oftentimes when you move towards pornography, your mind really gets trapped into that. Your mind gets really addicted to it, and it's like a fantasy world. And when you try to come out of that, it's really hard for the mind, because this real life human interaction can never really meet your needs and your satisfaction as what you experience when you're in this fantasy world. So people have a really hard time moving away from pornography. But you can do that, and you can choose to not do that. If somebody was interested in sexual contact, I would encourage you to have a partner, a real life partner, rather than going towards pornography, because that can be really indulgent and the mind can get addicted to that. And then it's very hard to get away from it, where the mind kind of indulges in it so often that the mind's central desire is increasing. So I've written a lot about this, or a certain amount about it in the book, so you can read more about it. But this is something that ultimately you would like to eliminate if your mind is a craving pornography and addicted to it. Okay, so any questions on this third precept? No questions? Okay, so now let's go to the fourth one. This one's really straightforward. Okay, so here the Buddha says, abandoning false speech, refraining from false speech, a truth speaker, one to be relied on, trustworthy, dependable, not a deceiver of the world. Right? So he's talking about being trustworthy and dependable by not lying. He understood this so much that this is another teaching that I've inserted here, where he's talking about telling jokes. He's actually teaching his son Rahula. Some people think the Buddha left his family and never came back. This isn't actually true. He actually came back to where his family was, and his son, his wife, his mother, all these people started ordaining with him, and they were learning how to get to enlightenment. So here he's teaching his son, and he's explaining to his son that he should practice in such a way that he doesn't even lie when he's telling a joke. Right? When we lie, there's some craving that the mind has. And the mind thinks that if I tell the truth, I won't get what I want. So I'm going to lie in order to get what I want. Right? This is what the mind's doing. But people find out your lies, they discover your lies, and they find you to be untrustworthy and undependable. So when that great new project is coming up at work and you would like to get staffed on it in order to increase your career and your professionalism, they're not going to staff you on it because they don't see you as someone who's dependable and reliable and trustworthy. So by you speaking the truth, now people will be able to see you as trustworthy and reliable and dependable. But if you've done a lot of lying, like at different times in your life, you know that you had to keep your lies straight. Between one person and the other, you were telling different people different lies, and now your mind was obsessively trying to figure out what you said to one person versus another, right? And that is going to be very hard for you to ever get to peace and joy, which is the enlightened mental state, if your mind is obsessively trying to figure out what you say to one person versus another. So if you just tell the truth, your mind can be at peace where you don't have to worry about what you said to one person versus another. And the Buddha understood this so closely that he didn't even tell a joke that was a lie. Now, I know some people don't think about a Buddha as someone who tells a joke, right? Because you usually see the Buddha in these very solemn pictures, right? Like I don't have one up here, but you can see it around the temple. He's usually sitting in meditation. He looks very solemn, right? But I can assure you that enlightened beings are happy. They're jovial, right? They're having fun. They're enjoying life. They're not sitting around being stiff and serious all day, right? They're having fun. They're telling jokes. But when they tell jokes, they don't tell a lie. If you can imagine this person sharing all this wisdom to be able to help people get to enlightenment, but on the side, if he was over here telling jokes that were lies, people wouldn't be able to trust him when he was sharing teachings to be able to help them get to enlightenment. So the Buddha told jokes. He told jokes. He just told jokes that were truthful. And truthful jokes are actually a lot more challenging to tell because you need to think it through. You need to have a lot of wisdom to tell truthful jokes. But usually people laugh at those jokes a lot more than when they're jokes that are lying. So you don't need to degrade people or diminish people. You don't need to tell jokes that are lies. You can tell jokes that are bright and cheerful and uplifting and that are truthful. And this is actually going to cause people to have even more fun and actually laugh more. It's just going to mean that you need more wisdom to be able to tell those kinds of jokes. So you cultivate wisdom to be able to tell those kind of jokes, the truthful jokes. So any questions on this one? No questions? Okay. All right. So now the last one. This is the fifth precept. So here the Buddha says, refraining from strong drink and sloth-producing drugs, substances that cause heedlessness, the basis for heedlessness. So again, you need to investigate and examine the teachings of the Buddha. If you run across something and you don't understand it, or maybe you think you understand it, but you just don't want to assume that your understanding of that word is the same as someone else's, you're going to need to get a dictionary perhaps. Because when I ran across this, I kind of assumed I knew what this word heedlessness meant, but I wasn't interested in assuming. I wanted to know the truth. I was interested to know what is the truth. So I went and looked up this word. And here's what heedlessness means. It means careless, thoughtless, inattentive, uncalm, unaware, or unmindful. So anytime you put a substance into the body that's causing a lack of awareness of mind, you're actually walking in the opposite direction of enlightenment. Because As you know from the Eightfold Path, if you study that with me, you're cultivating awareness of mind so that you can understand the wholesome qualities and unwholesome qualities in your mind, and you can eliminate the unwholesome and cultivate the wholesome. But if you put drugs and alcohol and substances that cause heedlessness into the body, it's producing heedlessness. And now you're not going to be able to have that awareness of mind to be able to cultivate wise decision making. If you go visit a prison, if you went there and you talked to people, they would probably tell you that I'm here for murder, or I'm here for robbing a bank or something like that. But if you're like, no, like, why are you really here? They're like, if I would have never been high on those drugs, I would have never killed those people, right? It was being high on those drugs that caused me to be here. Or I would have never robbed that bank if I wasn't feeding a drug habit. So it was the drugs and the alcohol, the substances that really landed people in jail. About 80% of the people there, they will tell you that it was substances that they ended up being there for. Their actual charge might be murder, or their actual charge might be robbing the bank, but the true reason why they're there is drugs and alcohol, right? So taking these substances are going to lead to all kinds of unwise decisions. That's why the Buddha puts this one last. Because if you use substances, you're more likely to kill, you're more likely to steal, you're more likely to lie, you're more likely to have sexual misconduct, you're more likely to do all of these things. So the Buddha is teaching you to cultivate mindfulness or awareness of mind, and putting substances into the body are going to take you in a different direction than that. But some of these substances, you need to look at them very closely because it's not black and white. Again, there's a gray area, right? So something like marijuana. We know that marijuana has medical benefits. There's irrefutable evidence. There's children who have 20 seizures a day. They give them a little bit of CBD oil on the tongue. They don't have another seizure for 6 months with just one little drop of CBD oil in the tongue. So a marijuana plant can be used for a high, but it can also be used for medical benefits too. And you need to be able to know what the difference is. The marijuana plant has two sides to it. It has THC and it has CBD. The THC is what produces the high. The CBD is what's the medical benefits. So if somebody was looking for medical benefits, they're going to be looking for a high CBD and a very low THC. And they're usually going to ingest it through an edible or like an oil. People who are looking for highs, they could use edibles and oils too, but they're oftentimes smoking it, right? And this is causing harm to the lungs, right? This is causing harm to their physical body. So you would need to know for yourself whether you're using this for medical benefit or not. And you need to look closely at the medical benefit, because some people, they take this for stress or anxiety. There's no amount of marijuana that's going to solve your stress or anxiety, right? As soon as you're off the marijuana, you're not going to be able to have calmness and peacefulness any longer. So the cause of the stress and anxiety is the craving, desire, attachment, and you need to get rid of that. And that's what's going to get rid of the stress and anxiety. So you need to make sure you have a real valid purpose for using the marijuana. Cigarettes, there's no medical benefit with cigarettes, and that's why more and more people are getting away from cigarettes, because we've learned that there's no medical benefit. And this is why so many people died from smoking cigarettes. There's a lot of substances there. And if someone was going to move away from cigarettes, I would suggest they do it gradually. If you're smoking 20 cigarettes a day, go down to 18 for like a week or two. Then go down to 15 for like a week or two. Then go down to 12 for like a week or two, and gradually move away from it like that. It's a more sustainable change, and the body and the mind will appreciate that. You're going to need to also pay attention to prescription medications. There's some prescription medications that can actually produce heedlessness, right? So when you're getting a prescription from a doctor, don't just assume that you're getting a prescription that's going to be helpful and beneficial. Research, right? We live in the information age. We have information at our fingertips. We can research that medicine, and we can know within a couple of minutes whether it's addictive or not. And if you see that it's addictive, you can ask your doctor, hey, doctor, is there another medicine I can take besides this one? And there might be, and they can give you a different medicine. But you might see some rare situations where there is no other medicine. That's the only one. But at least you know that. And now when you're taking that medicine, you'll try to get off of it as soon as possible, because you're not interested in getting addicted to it. So you're going to need to pay attention to your prescription medicines too. You're going to need to pay attention to your caffeine. that if you take caffeine, it actually will produce heedlessness. Your mind goes into this excited state, or at least has this energy, more energy. And then when you're not on the caffeine, you will drop off. Your energy will drop off. An enlightened being has sustainable energy all day long. They don't get exhausted. They don't get tired. An enlightened being gets sleepy, but they don't get exhausted or tired. But you'll never get to that if you keep relying on caffeine to lift your mind up, and then it drops back off, and it lifts you up, and then it drops you back off. You're going to need to get to the point where you don't have this in your system, and you can go throughout your day with sustainable energy. That's going to give your mind the ability to sustain that energy. If you choose to get off of caffeine, remind yourself, you're detoxing from a drug. You're going to have withdrawal symptoms. You're going to have headaches. You might have shakes. You might have dry mouth. That's because it's a toxin. It's a drug. So just remind yourself of that you're going to need to get over the detox period. It's about 3 days to be able to get past that. And once you do, if you can stay off of caffeine, you'll see that your mind will develop more energy, more sustainable energy all throughout your day. We learned as children that excessive amounts of sugar can also produce a high. So typically as we age, we don't use that stuff as much. But even sugar, if you used it excessively, it could produce a high or heedlessness. Down here, we also have psychedelic substances. Some people will share with you that psychedelic substances are helping you to get to enlightenment. This isn't actually true. A psychedelic substance does produce some introspection where you can look inward at the mind, but you need to develop that to be sustainable all throughout your day. Because in order to get to enlightenment, you're going to need to be introspective at all times during your day. If you rely on a substance like a psychedelic substance, your mind's not developing that quality to be introspective at all times during your day. So you can't be on the phone with your mom getting ready to have a difficult conversation and be like, hey, Mom, let me go take some psychedelic mushrooms. I know that you'd like that answer from me about that particular topic, but I need to go drop some LSD and some psychedelic mushrooms, and I'm going to be back, and I'll answer you when I come back. Right? You can't do that. That's not the way the world works. So you're going to need to be introspective at all times during your day. When you're in that business meeting and you're having a real challenge in that business meeting, you're going to need to be introspective and look inward. Right? You don't have time, and you're not going to be able, and it's not going to help you to go take some psychedelic mushrooms before your business meeting. Right? So you're going to need to be introspective. And if you rely on something like a psychedelic, your mind's not ever cultivating that introspection naturally so that you can have it all throughout your day. So people who are saying that psychedelic substances are helping you get to enlightenment, they're not understanding enlightenment and how this works. So I encourage you to not look at psychedelics as helping you, but looking at it as it's hindering you. It's actually holding you back from being able to experience what the Buddha taught, which is this enlightened mental state. So do you guys have any questions on this one? No questions here? Let me check online. Might have something online. Let's see. Don't see anything there. Okay, I don't see anything online. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take a break for about an hour and a half. It's actually a little bit more than an hour and a half. We're going to come back at 2 o'clock, and I'm going to teach walking meditation. If you're interested in learning walking meditation, this is really helpful if you have an overactive mind or if you have a lot of energy in your mind, and the last thing you're thinking about is sitting down and being still to meditate. Walking meditation can be really helpful for that. So if you'd like to learn that, I'm going to teach that at 2 o'clock. Okay. So thank you guys for your interest to learn, and perhaps I'll see you guys later. Okay. Enjoy.